let's take Islamism to its logic. Imagine if they actually do conquer the West and conquer the world. Where will they take humanity? They'll take humanity to death and destruction. Life will be short and nasty and brutal. If the communists, whether it is neo-communism, the one that's identity-based or the one that's economics-based, give them the world, let them take control, let them have it. Where will they take the world? Same thing. Mass murder, starvation, life will be short and nasty and brutal and tyrannical. And so humanity eventually will just have to end up with, what is the alternative? So what is the narrative, the idea for life? And that led me to conclude Christianity.
What does this tell you, when we joke about the sort of the women drinking the tea that don't want this to be messy and sort of don't understand what reality is, that there's going to be some things that look a little upsetting or whatever. What does this tell you of the state of classical liberalism? Because, a decade ago when I started saying I'm not a progressive, I'm an old school liberal, you were saying very much the same thing, you and Bill Maher and Sam Harris and a couple other people. But it does seem like even the phrase classical liberal is sort of lost on people at the moment, at least from an American context. For me to explain to people, yes, I'm a classical liberal, it doesn't even make sense anymore because the word liberal has been so mucked. But do you think there was a flaw in the classical liberal mindset in some sense, that we need the conservatives to do a little bit of the dirty work because classical liberals tend to more so be the woman with the tea?
Yeah, I think classical liberalism does not have missionaries. And so number one, classical liberalism does not have missionaries. And number two, they don't realize how incredibly Western and white and privileged classical liberalism is. And so classical liberals are talking to other classical liberals, and we all vehemently agree with one another and we love each other's company. But we don't realize that there are people, and they also don't realize we're a minority, and that a lot of people across the world hate classical liberalism and what it has. Classical liberalism gave birth to modernity. And even when you analyze classical liberalism itself, Christianity gave birth to classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is a product of Christianity. And the Christian arm is the missionary arm. It's the one that used to go out to the world and tell them about how wonderful Christianity is and eventually get people with a classical liberal sensibility. And so, unfortunately, what classical liberals have done is they have they neutered the Christian arm, their missionary arm, and we're paying a huge, huge price for that.
How do you think your own evolution is connected to that? Because obviously, born Muslim, you were a well-known sort of new atheist for a while, and it's just in the last couple of years that you've converted to Christianity. So I sense your own bedrock thinking is now connecting back to that arm.
Yeah, I am. So I'll just put aside sort of the personal story of that. But in this intellectual, a defender of classical liberalism, I don't think I stopped asking the question, so where does that come from? What is it rooted in? And I think for a long time, I listened to people who would jump from the Enlightenment period to the Greeks and Romans, and because they didn't want to say anything about Christianity. But if you do it, diligently, you are going to go back to the Christian roots of classical liberalism. And then you're going to realize that it couldn't have classical liberalism, the secularized version of it, could not have come about without the tolerance and the freedom of conscience that Christians promoted, without this insistence that what governs the individual conscience is the Sermon on the Mount, without going back to this figure, Jesus Christ, who was, analytically, all sorts of people would just say, there was Jesus, and there was Muhammad, and there was Moses, and this, that, and the other. But if you're really honest with yourself, you're going to discover that Jesus is unique. He's different. His teachings are different. He brings about a revolution without ever using any kind of violence. And to this day, places where his teachings take hold look very different. That's another thing that also got me by. I started to reflect on when we lived in Kenya, the Somalis were called shifters. So we Somalis, as a tiny minority living in Kenya, we were causing about probably 80% of the trouble there. And looking at the Kenyan Christians, and they had an aversion towards violence, the ones who practice Christianity. Today, you look at a place like Nigeria and you compare the Christian Nigerians with the Muslim Nigerians, and it's just astounding. And it's the same, South Korea, North Korea. You look at, Christian Lebanon and Christian Lebanese and Muslim Lebanese. So there is something about Christianity that is unique. And that, in my view, I've come to accept that is true. And that if, as many of my classical liberal friends have done, if you try to divorce the two, the outcome that you like from its foundational pillars, because you consider that superstitious, you get yourself and your societies into trouble, and that's where we are.
And by the way, for people that want to know more about this is what, as you know, Ayaan, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson did, I think, 4 public events debating literally this very topic in essence. Did it all just start in the Enlightenment, or was there something before it? So if we take what's going on now in America as it pertains to immigration, not just Somali, but we've closed the borders, we're kind of cleaning things up. Maybe we're leading the world again. Are you hopeful at the moment? Are you bullish on the West at the moment? Or do you think we have just now 10 years of just crazy fighting to get through this? Maybe it's different for every country.
It's going to be different for every country. I'm bullish on America. I see a revival of Christianity. I also see people, some of the most intelligent people in America asking these questions. Just like you said, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson were having this conversation. They're not the only ones who are having these conversations. These conversations are being had in Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. They're being had in Texas. They're being had in Wall Street. They're being had in Miami, from our friends. So I know that things will get worse and then they will get better. But I am bullish as long as we have these conversations, because I'm also really confident that human beings have not come up with anything better. And so, let's take Islamism to its logic. Imagine if they actually do conquer the West and conquer the world. Where will they take humanity? They'll take humanity to death and destruction. Life will be short and nasty and brutal. If the communists, whether it is neo-communism, the one that's identity-based or the one that's economics-based, give them the world, let them take control, let them have it. Where will they take the world? Same thing. Mass murder, starvation, life will be short and nasty and brutal and tyrannical. And so humanity eventually will just have to end up with, what is the alternative? So what is the narrative, the idea for life? And that led me to conclude Christianity.
Right. So the question is, if we're to progress as a species in a positive sense, not in the progressive political sense, we keep getting dragged. How many times do we have to basically be dragged back to the abyss before we learn some of those lessons? So to that point, so when you see
Judeo-Christian or biblical, again, I want to point, for instance, to Israel. And there are very secular, atheistic, hardcore Israelis, but Israel is not led by those hardcore atheists. It's led by biblical Israelis who want to say that the identity of Israel comes from the Bible and that they want to have a society based on that is democratic, humane, fair, and defends the rights of its individuals. And I think that's where things are going.
If you're craving more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics, check out our politics playlist right here. And if you don't want to miss any future videos, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.